Recent developments are showing there is a lack of consequences for exporters such as livestock shipping services who fail in their duty of care towards livestock. How do you explain the lack of serious consequences for exporters such as LSS who have been investigated for fraud and ongoing welfare issues?
Senator, I guess, as we've had this discussion many times, I think I'd reject the starting point, which is there is a lack of consequence for exporters. I'll ask Ms Irwin to run through the statistics and how we've gone about the investigations that have come into the public domain and the other activities we take. But I can assure you that there are significant consequences for exporters that aren't able to meet the objectives of our regulation. I'll ask Rebecca to just take you through some of the stats in relation to that.
Could I just add one bit to the question, which
Sure.
might help give you some context? Because it's understandable you say that, Mr Glyde, but there are some glaring examples, and maybe this could be commented on by Ms Irwin, because I understand that LSS is implicated in Gaza, Israel, Egypt, Mauritius, Jordan and Kuwait with regard to not following the rules, as well as the deaths of 4,179 sheep on the almost 40-year-old Beta 3 of heat exhaustion, and also involved in the cattle who died on the flight of Kazakhstan. So that was why I was started off with that question: why has no sanction at least been imposed on them? So there seems to be a record there.
Senator, just before Ms Irwin starts, I'd just make the point that LSS is one of the largest exporters, so you would expect in any system where we can't get 100% perfection because of the nature of working with animals over these distances, you'd expect them to actually have some non-compliances, as indeed other exporters have had. But the fact that LSS comes to mind a lot is in part due to the number of animals that they are involved in, the number of shipments they're involved in. And it's also important to think about put these in the context of the broader trade. I think in 2013, total exports were of the order of live animals, cattle, sheep and goats, was of the order of $900 million in terms of the value of the trade. But there was also 2.9 million animals shipped during that time. And so what we have been focusing on, and quite rightly, is trying to make sure that as many animals as possible meet the requirements of the regulation. And so when you think, I think it's important to think about the number of incidents we have in that broader context. But with that, by way of introduction, I might ask Ms Irwin to take us through some of the statistics in relation to our compliance activities.
Thanks, Mr Glyde. Thanks, Senator Rhiannon. I think before I turn to the sort of specifics of any individual exporter, the regulatory framework does provide the regulator with a range of compliance tools and options. We work under two acts, both the Export Control Act and the Australian Meat and Livestock Industry Act. Under those acts, we have options to look at in relation to individual consignment and supply chain approvals. We have the ability to put conditions on individual consignments. We have the ability to put conditions on an exporter's licence. We have the ability to look at whether or not certain consignments should be approved. And we also have the powers to take actions in relation to a licence. In addition to that, both acts provide for criminal offence provisions. So under Section 9 of the Export Control Act, it's a criminal offence for exporters to not meet conditions of their export licences. Under the Australian Meat and Livestock Industry Act, it's also a criminal offence for exporters to not meet licence conditions. So there are a range of compliance tools available to the regulator under both pieces of legislation. To just specifically look at what the regulator has done in relation to SCAS compliance across the board since SCAS has been introduced, Senator Rhiannon, there have been 29 reports of SCAS non-compliance received. In terms of where they've come from, 23 of those have come from third parties. 6 of them have come directly from exporters. Out of the 29 reports, 19 investigations have been completed, and those reports that have been completed have made a range of findings. 6 found that sheep were outside approved supply chains. 4 found...
With these ones, because I wanted you to come back to LSS, because I did rattle off a whole number of countries there. So as you're going through these figures about the ones completed, could you indicate where LSS comes into this, please?
Look, I have that separately, Senator. I can do that after this if you like. So just in terms of the 19 investigations completed, 6 found that sheep were found outside approved supply chains, 4 found that cattle were approved outside supply chains, 5 found that there were animal handling or slaughter issues that didn't meet OIE animal welfare recommendations, 1 related to Pakistan, and 3 found there was no regulatory breach. 10 remain under investigation. Following those reports, the regulators applied a varying range of conditions to exporters. They include reducing the size and complexity of supply chains. So you can imagine that a supply chain might have a number of abattoirs and a number of feedlots. A way of managing risk is to bring that down to like 1 feedlot and 1 abattoir so that the exporter can maintain control and traceability through the supply chain. And Senator, there are a range of, in the compliance framework that is publicly available for SCAS, we have the categorisation of minor, major and critical non-compliances. I do have the statistics for a number of the key exporters in relation to that.
Could you table those, please?
Yes, Senator, let me just... Look, I just only have them on a hand note written, but let me explain what they are. In relation to... And I think it's important because it puts the exporters in context. In relation to LSS, LSS has recorded 15 non-compliances. 13 are minor. 1 was major, that related to Jordan. 1 was a critical finding, which also related to Jordan. Emmanuel Exports has had 14...
Before you leave LSS, so has Gaza been investigated as part of that?
Senator, there are 2 current reports being investigated in relation to Gaza and they remain under investigation.
So Gaza hasn't been finalised for LSS?
That's right, Senator.
And so you're saying everything else, Kuwait, Mauritius, Egypt, even Israel, that they're all minor?
No, Senator.
Point of clarification, if I may, Chair. Mauritius LSS does not export to Mauritius and never has, to my knowledge. I think that's
exactly.
Correct. Thank you. Good. Keep going.
Senator, what I can say in terms of the current investigations in relation to LSS that are on foot, so there are 2, as I said, in relation to the specifics on LSS, 2 completed SCAS investigations. 1 recorded a critical non-compliance and 1 recorded a major non-compliance. Both of those relate to the export of sheep to Jordan. In terms of current investigations that relate to LSS, there are 6 investigations on foot. 3 relate to sheep outside the supply chain, 2 in Jordan and 1 in the United Arab Emirates. 2 relate to Gaza, and there is 1 report relating to unloading of livestock in Israel.
Thank you. So, Mr Glyde, are you seriously saying that because LSS is such a big exporter, that therefore you can expect this very large number of non-compliance? You would expect that when you're a large exporter that you would learn how to do the job properly.
I was really trying to establish, Senator Rhiannon, the broader context in which that LSS operates, and indeed trying to give a few statistics in relation to the whole of the trade. But what we've found is that when you look at the number of non-compliances, LSS and all I'm not condoning non-compliances. Our whole objective is to try and make sure that we have completely compliant supply chains. But LSS is not the only exporter that has recorded a significant number of non-compliances, and Ms Irwin was going through, but if I could compare LSS with its 15, Emmanuel Exports 14, Wellard Rural Exports 32, International Livestock Exports 29, and North Australian Cattle Company 81. The vast majority of those are minor non-compliances, which often relate to overdue paperwork and the like. But what what we're trying to say is that LSS is not alone in having had a series of non-compliances, and we work with each of the exporters to try and make sure that we have compliant supply chains. And Ms Irwin ran through the sort of actions that we can take to try and make sure that those supply chains are increasingly compliant. But I think there has been quite a focus on LSS, but we try to look at the whole of all of the industry and take action proportionate to the activities, proportionate to the extent of non-compliance, and we've got a range of tools that we're working through to try and make sure that we do get the compliance we're
Senator
after.
Rhiannon, sorry, Mr. Scott, may I just assist? Would it assist the committee if we could have the incidents tabled?
Sure.
So then when the
I did ask that, thank
in
you.
the cool day of light, we can sit down and see how many transgressions there are compared to how much they do. And if they're only paperwork, it might help all the senators.
More than happy to do that, Senator, and indeed
Sorry,
I think
Senator.
No, that's
the
helpful.
track record of the non-compliances is on our website, but that would be handy. And Ms Irwin's handwriting is worse than mine, so we'll have to do a little bit of typing in order to do that, but we'd certainly be happy to provide that as soon as we finish here.
Is it possible, sorry, Senator Rhiannon, just while we're at that too, is it possible to have information as to how many head of animals are exported, what they are to where, so we can put apples against, I hate using that term, it's real crappy, so we can compare the amount of shipments they have to the amount of infringements?
we can provide that.
I'm turning into a politician, my God, sorry.
Senator, probably one of the key comparisons is to give the number of consignments, because our regulatory regime works by consignment. It's a consignment by consignment approval process, so we can give you the number of consignments and the number of head per consignment, because that's the context in which you need to look at.
I think that would help us all.
And also, can you fit
Thank
in
you.
with that table the criminal actions? Because I thought it previously, and I must have been mistaken, Mr Glyde, I thought you had said previously that it wasn't possible to charge them with criminal acts, but I gather I was wrong on that assumption.
No, that's not the case, as Ms Irwin
Yes,
said.
so I've heard that set out. So could that be in the table as well? Because I was also interested how you described there's different points of entry that you can come in, because you're looking at it from the farm to the point of slaughter, at what point that you're taking action and if action has been taken. Look, I was particularly interested in Gaza, because the Gaza incident seems to be, and I just want to show you this very disturbing photograph. It's a cow with a steel rod being stuck into its eye. That's in Gaza at the moment. And then this one is one with blood all over the ground. Also in Gaza, the cattle have been shipped in from Israel, and then with a small knife that the man is going for the throat. So could you tell us where the Gaza, because it seems as though the Gaza one, we keep on getting reports.
Just a point of order, Senator Rhiannon. Are you tabling those?
Yes, happy to.
Right.
So, do you mind, through you, Chair, if I ask Senator a question? How are we able to validate the source of this material? I mean, if we're going to form a view as this examination occurs, I'd like validation.
I'm happy to give that.
So,
Though I don't think I'm actually being questioned, but I'm happy to cooperate.
Mr Glenn.
Just
So
in
it's
relation
about
to
Gaza.
Senator O'Sullivan's question, that's one of the key tasks that we have when we receive a complaint, is to establish the bona fides of the evidence to be able to see whether or not it's...
So you're able to validate the statements made by the Senator with those photographs?
We do our best, and I might ask Ms Irwin or Dr Clegg, who runs our investigations, just to run through the sort of things that we
I don't
do.
want to break Senator Rhiannon's rhythm here, but I'm particularly interested in those two photographs connected to the incidents as alleged, so that as I listen to any examination that subsequently occurs, to me it's we've had the right reference point to start.
Yeah.
So
And we do have to. We obviously have to behave as model regulators, and so we have to make sure that when a company or a particular exporter is accused, that we're sure of the information on the basis on which that accusation has been made, and we do that. That's part of our process of doing the investigation, writing the report, and taking the action.
Okay, just hang on.
Well, there we
I'd
go.
like to just clarify, Senator Rhiannon, are you going to be asking questions about...
I've asked my questions on that. I'm moving on. I'm still on LSS, but I'm not
So are
asking.
you asking any questions in relation to these
Yeah,
two photographs which you would want to table? Because if you don't ask a question about them, there's no point in tabling.
My question was about those incidents in the context of the, what I understand, the investigation into the Gaza cruelty incidents.
Okay, so they don't relate to these photographs?
No, they're just one of many
Well,
incidents.
we won't table them, we'll just move on.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're just staying with LSS. I wanted to ask about Gary Robertson, the General Manager of Livestock Shipping Services. I understand he allegedly forged documents in respect of the sheep on the Ocean Drover, which was rerouted to Pakistan from Bahrain, was employed at Emmanuel Exports until around the time of the controversy of the Al Kuwait case, and then at Wellards until around the time of the Bahrain-Pakistan outrage. Who is investigating the matter of Gary Robertson's alleged forging of documents? The police or the Department of Agriculture?
Senator Rhiannon, I might ask my colleague, Mr Hunter.
Sorry, is this before the court?
No, not as yet, but I might ask Mr Hunter to explain this, because Mr Hunter's responsible for our compliance division, and so when there are matters that might involve that criminal activity or otherwise, then it's over to our compliance division, and they have the responsibility for that.
And is everything that's going to be said public knowledge?
What I can say is public knowledge, but I wouldn't be commenting on any investigations on particular individuals or companies that may be afoot in that regard.
Proceed.
So is that the answer? Was that the answer?
Well, we wouldn't comment, Senator, on any active investigations in relation to matters that we may be gathering briefs of evidence to put before the Director of Public Prosecutions.
So as you said we there, can I assume therefore it's the Department of Agriculture and not police?
The Department of Agriculture has an enforcement team within it, and I'm happy to share with you, Senator, the skills and abilities of the enforcement team, as well as the way that they operate. There's about 21 investigators in that team. They work as investigative personnel. They work under the heads of government operational law enforcement, so the Hocklear sort of standards. They also work under the Australian Government Investigation Standards, the AGIS standards.
Can they impose financial penalties?
Beg yours?
Can they impose financial penalties?
No, they put briefs of evidence to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Right, so...
They must take into account the legislative requirements in relation to the Crimes Act and the Evidence Acts of 1914 and 1995 respectively there. We do work very closely with the Australian Federal Police and the Customs Service on all matters intelligence that can be conveyed between those agencies in developing a brief of evidence for consideration by the Director of Public Prosecutions.
So just to understand the process, does this mean that the police need to be involved in investigations where criminal sanctions are imposed?
No,
They don't?
no,
So you can handle that all
we
yourself?
can handle that.
But you can't impose financial
We can
fines?
put those before the courts for the courts to consider through the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Thank you. So,
Sorry, do you mind, Senator, if I just ask a question of the Chair?
Is it on the same line?
Well, it is on the same lines, and I'm deeply concerned about that passage of question and answer. And I'd ask that consideration be given that the record of Hansard reflect that the answers provided by the department were in no way attached, specific or by inference, related to any company or individual. Now, I know you opened that.
I think Mr Hunter's made it very clear that he won't be referring to any company or individual.
Well, he made it clear that he wouldn't refer to any investigation that was current, where a brief of evidence was being prepared, and it was in response to a question from the Senator. I'm very troubled that where allegations are made and due process and natural justice has taken its place, that there be no inference made from any passage in this place to suggest that that company may be the one that is the subject of an investigation where they're preparing a brief of evidence.
Quite right, Senator, and if I left the committee with that impression, it wasn't the case. And quite clearly, I'm not commenting on specifics of investigations. I'm merely outlining the process so that the committee has some understanding of the skills and the competencies, as well as the powers that we have under legislation to progress investigations.
Yes, and I've picked that up, and I don't think anybody's transgressed.
Thank you, Chair.
And
my
you've
question
got
to
2
General.
minutes.
Mr Glyde, how bad does the cruelty have to be, or how egregious the violation of the regulations have to be, before the department will impose a licence suspension or cancellation? And I am asking that question in the context of LSS in particular, because the ships that they're using are now being seen as some of the worst used in the trade.
I don't want to, again, comment on specific companies and behaviour, but we've issued over the course of the last, I think since about September 2012, we've issued 7 show cause notices, they're called, to exporters to give us the reasons as to why we shouldn't be suspending or cancelling their licences. There's a lot of action that's taken, Senator, that is not made public.
But what happened with the 7 show causes?
Some of them are being closed out, some of them are still under investigation. We're responding to the information that's been provided. What I'm trying to get across, Senator, is that we have a compliance strategy that is on our website that we are following, that our aim here is to make sure that we export animals consistent with our regulations. We're trying to facilitate the trade with high animal welfare standards. And so the sort of actions that we've been taking, which are in the public domain, such as Ms Irwin mentioned, removing poorly performing supply chains, removing poorly performing parts of supply chains, restricting the degrees of freedom that the exporters might have, requiring lots more auditing, requiring lots more supervision and reporting back to the department. They're all part of the process of escalating the compliance activity to try and make sure we have compliant supply chains. It comes a point, though, when we've done all of that activity, and if the exporter is not able to provide a compliant supply chain, then we begin to question whether they have the competence or they're operating with integrity, and that's when we issue things like show cause notices. So we're moving through that process with an effort to try and make sure the trade meets the animal welfare standards that the Australian community expects.
Could you just take on notice providing the committee with more the details of those 7 show causes, where it's up to, what's involved?
To the extent that we can, without prejudicing further investigations.
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay, thank you. Between you two guys, you've got 14 minutes each, if you need it. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Look, I'll just place on record my total disagreement with the line of questions that have been asked.